Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the Rustic Fawn Lodge. And it's time for my weekend reading report. Every weekend, usually on Sunday, I will do this fantastic and entertaining program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. Usually, I am accompanied by an undead mummy who's thousands of years old, but he didn't want to come up here to the lodge with me, so he's back home at stately Vaughan Manor, where I am sure he is not causing any trouble at all. But I had to come up here to the lodge because there was a bunch of work up here I needed to do, and I did some of it. Not all. I had books to read. But I did some of the work I came up here to do. And I also read some stuff. And I read some stuff last week. Not as much as I would have liked because it was unexpectedly busy last week. The middle portion of last week suddenly became very busy, which is why you haven't seen much of me the past few days. I haven't even had time to make these very important videos. I know, it's terrible. Anyway, hopefully next week will be better. We'll see. But I did manage to read some stuff. So let's talk about those things that I read. So, on the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I will buy any new ones. Book number 133, I finished this book. This is The Mabare Reader, edited by Donald A. Wollheim. Fantastic book. And it was perfect because I read this for Horror Mayhem. We are experiencing Horror Mayhem at the moment here on BookTube. Horror Mayhem, a fantastic reading event where we read horror. It was created by the Bookish Bryants, and a whole bunch of us are participating, reading horror fiction, usually short horror fiction, and this is a collection of short stories, and they're awesome short stories. Really pulpy, really great, really entertaining. This is a dynamite collection. I did a whole video on the Mabare Reader, and there was also a second volume, more macabre, which I will probably read this month. I might as well read the sequel as well as the original, since this one was so good. And so I talk more about this book in that video. I will try to remember to link that down below in case you are interested. And honestly, why wouldn't you be? But it was fantastic. So this was book 133, great collection of classic horror stories. Well, most of these stories are from the pulp era, and that just made them better. So yeah, The Mabare Reader. This was awesome for Horror Mayhem, so I read that. Book 134, I read on the magic yet slow tablet. So let me open up the tablet and get to it. The next book I read was this. It's The Mighty Thor by Walter Simonson, Volume 3. So I read The Mighty Thor, Volume 3, book 134 in the 500 book challenge. I'm continuing my epic quest to read every single issue of Thor from the original run of Thor, which ran from the early 1960s into the mid-1990s. And I am reading right now the greatest run of Thor of all time, which is Walter Simonson's legendary run on Thor. And this was volume 3, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic. By the end of this, though, poor Thor was turned into a frog. He was turned into a frog. And so that becomes a whole saga, a whole Asgardian frog saga in itself. So, in the issue I read this morning, which is in the 4th volume of Walter Simonson's Thor, I read all about the mighty Thor as a frog. And it was great. So I read this, and it continues to be fantastic. But the thing about Walter Simonson's run on Thor is that during his run, there were issues that he didn't write or draw. And so those issues are not included in the volumes I've been reading. This is why I can't wait till this run is in Epic Collections, because Marvel Epic Collections collect everything. And so I had to get this issue of Thor, and I read this one because I missed it. This is issue 356, right? My glasses are not on, obviously, but I think that's 356. It was a great fill-in issue with Hercules. You know, it's been a while in my reading of Thor since Hercules was in an issue of Thor as a major player, and he was great in this issue. This was a really fun fill-in issue. There are a few other fill-in issues that Walter Simonson didn't do that are not included in these volumes. So I will have to, just get those on their own. And they're all available electronically. So you can get any single issue of Thor you want. They're all available. And so that's just how I'll have to get them. But yeah, this was awesome. So my reading of Thor is going swimmingly. Oh no, what did I do? I made something disappear, which I didn't want to disappear. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm back where I want it to be. I'll put the magic tablet aside for right now. I will have to pick it up again soon. But right now we're going to be talking about book number 135, which was this one. This is T.E.D. Klein's Dark Gods, which has always been one of my favorite books since I first read it so many years ago in the actually, it wasn't the 80s when I read this. I picked it up used. I picked up a paperback that was used, I believe. Or was it this copy? No, I think it was a paperback. And I loved it. Klein is a great writer of horror who has not written much. He's a great writer of horror who really doesn't like to write, but he's a really good writer. Go figure. He spent a lot of time as an editor. He edited Twilight Zone magazine, which was a great magazine. And so he's known for being a writer of horror fiction, and his stuff is of very high quality, but there isn't much of it. And this is my favorite book of his, out of the 2 or 3 books that exist from T.E.D. Klein. There might be 3 or 4 books that exist, but only a couple of them are fiction, I think. So he does have The Ceremonies, a horror novel, which is great. And he has this book, Dark Gods, which is 4 novellas. And I've always liked this book, but it's been a long time since I read it. So I picked it up again for Horror Mayhem, and I read Dark Gods. And I thought, how will I feel about this now? Which one of these stories will be my favorite now? And will I still have the same feelings will this still be one of my favorite books? Reading it now? Yes, it is still one of my favorite books. This is an extraordinarily good book. It has 4 horror novellas in it. It's got Children of the Kingdom is the opening story. Petey is the second story. Black Man with a Horn is the third story, and it ends with Needleman's God. So these are all at least good stories. The least of the stories, I think, is the second one, which is Petey. That kind of reminded me of one of the Stephen King... It didn't remind me of any particular Stephen King story from... what did I read recently? Skeleton Crew. Where you had some stories that were good but were just too long. This was a good story that was too long and it didn't have much of a payoff. And even that was kind of predictable. So Petey was good, about a bunch of yuppies at a party and you all want them to die. Unfortunately, they don't all die. It'd be nice if they did. They were all annoying characters, as was intended. So that was definitely my least favorite. Up to this point, my favorite story had been Black Man with a Horn, which is it's a Lovecraftian story, and it's about a guy who actually was a writer of horror and was one of the Lovecraft Circle and knew H.P. Lovecraft personally. probably based on E. Hoffman Price, probably, but who knows? But he was this writer doesn't exist. He's a fictional writer who wrote at the time of Lovecraft and knew Lovecraft and talks about Lovecraft because he's a little bitter because Lovecraft, became a world-renowned horror writer while his own stories have been forgotten. But he ends up in basically a Lovecraft story. Black Man with a Horn is very, very creepy. It's a very creepy story. And up to this point, it's been my favorite story. In a lot of ways, I guess it still is. It's just such a good, like, Cthulhu mythos story. It's excellent. It's really excellent. Probably the story that left the biggest impression, though, is the first one, Children of the Kingdom. And Children of the Kingdom is interesting. It takes place with the background being the blackout in New York, which I think happened, was it 1977? Some of you remember this. The blackout that happened in New York. It was a real event with a bunch of looting and stuff that happened. And it's a story about racial tensions and urban decay. And our main character is, he's a racist guy, but he's kind of one of those racist guys that if you called him out on being racist, he would be shocked. What? Me? Racist? No. But he's clearly racist. And his wife is the same way, clearly racist, entitled and racist, Her name's Karen, by the way. Her name's Karen. And this guy, he's, like I said, he's kind of a racist guy. He notices everybody's race and black people frighten him. And he doesn't feel comfortable around anybody who's poor, anybody. Like, poverty just bothers him. He's one of those people. And it's really disturbing to him that where he lives is not that far away from where there's poverty. And so this character is like that. His grandfather, though, is not like that. His grandfather is not racist and is not afraid of the poor or xenophobic like the main character is. And his grandfather, this main character's grandfather, has just moved into like an old folks home, basically. But it's one of those places where, you're not trapped in there or anything. This old guy can leave whenever he wants, and he often does. And he makes some friends in a nearby neighborhood. And so our narrator ends up meeting some people that he, in his regular life, would never meet or associate with. Because his grandfather, like I say, is not racist like he is. And so he ends up meeting some people, and one of these is a priest who has a very interesting story to tell and some very interesting theories about human history, or human prehistory, I should say. And this story is full of creepy, horrible monsters. And they're kind of reminiscent of the little people from Arthur Machen's work, but different, There's more than a little of the shadow over Innsmouth in this story, although these monsters are different monsters. But these horrible, creepy, gross monsters, they show up in this story. And these monsters, unlike our narrator, these monsters don't see any differences in human beings. To them, all humans are the same. They have no prejudices, these monsters. To them, all humans are just there to be used or killed. So, pretty horrible creatures in this story. I don't want to spoil it any more than I already have, but it's really effective. It's not the best story in the world, but it's a really good story of high quality, as you would expect from Klein. And the last story is called Needleman's God, which I don't think I'll give anything away for that story. Because that story, the first time I read it, it didn't impress me as much as it did this time. Reading it now, I don't know why, but I was really impressed with that story. And it could be It could actually be the best story in this collection. It might be. It was pretty well done. Very, very unsettling story. It's an unsettling story. I enjoyed it. It's good stuff. It's Dark Gods. I'll shut up about this book now. But that was book 135. So what am I reading right now? Well, first of all, I didn't expect to finish this today because I had work to do. And I did some of it. But I also finished that book. So I'm stuck up here until tomorrow. And I didn't bring any other books except for these two. And so I have to resort to my vast ebook library. And I chose a book from my vast ebook library to read, which I thought would be appropriate, which is this book by Hugh B. Cave. It's Morgenstrom and Others. Morgenstrom and Others, which is a collection of Hugh B. Cave's pulp stories. Hugh B. Cave was a very prolific pulp writer who wrote all kinds of stuff, detective stuff, but he also wrote a lot of horror. And you know, he kept writing horror his entire life. I think he was still writing horror into his 80s. So he was a busy guy pretty much forever. But he wrote all kinds of stuff, all kinds of different things. And this book is a book with stories chosen by the great editor, Carl Edward Wagner. Carl Edward Wagner came up with the idea to do a collection of Hugh B. Cave's pulp stories. And Hugh B. Cave, unfortunately, when Carl Edward Wagner proposed this book, Hugh B. Cave had lost every pulp story that he wrote in a house fire. So he had nothing to refer to. So he's like, I don't even remember these stories. I couldn't tell you which ones are even good because it's been, decades since I've read them. And so Carl Edward Wagner's like, well, I know. So Carl Edward Wagner chose the contents for this collection. And oddly enough, I've never read it. I've read another Hugh B. Cave collection, Death Stalks the Night, which was fantastic. But I got this one in ebook a few years ago now, actually. And I just, for some reason, I've never read it, probably because it's on my Kindle and in my Kindle library. And those books, no matter how great they are, I tend to forget that I have them. But I remembered today because I was going through my library and I was like, damn, how have I not read this? So I started this. Very pulpy. This is very weird tales, strange tales, kind of pulpy stuff, which is great. It is, however, and I didn't realize this when I started reading this, I think this is like a 600-page collection, which I wouldn't have known because I got it as an ebook, I didn't pay any attention, which is longer than I didn't plan on reading anything that long, but this one is that long, so what can I do? I've already started it. But then again, that's what the Kindle thing says. Who knows how long this book actually is? I should look it up on Goodreads or something and find out. But I have a feeling it's going to be a great read. Hugh B. Cave, I enjoyed the other collection I read from him. And yeah, pulpy stuff. I love pulpy stuff. So yeah, Morgenstrom and Others. I'm reading this now. And I don't know if I'll be finished with it by next week because it is a very long book. But I'll let you know in my weekend reading report. And that's all I read this week. I was going to read this, but I never got to it because I got really, really, really busy. So The Haun of Fear, this great EC comic book collection, I will probably start tomorrow. I will probably start reading this tomorrow. I did get one awesome thing in the mail. Jim from Mystery and Mayhem, fantastic booktube channel. I will link it down below. Anyway, he sent me a book because he apparently had two of these. This is Louis L'Amour's The Sackett Companion, which is a book that Louis L'Amour wrote about his Sackett novels. And I think this is one of the last things he ever did was put together this Sackett Companion. And apparently Jim had two of these. So he said, hey, I'll send you one. I've got two. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll take that. Just in time, because June on the Range is just around the corner. I'll talk about that in a future video. But yeah, he sent me this, for which I am very grateful. Thank you for sending me this fantastic Sackett Companion. This will be really interesting. I read the first Sackett book not too long. Well, actually, I guess it was last year. Jeez, okay, it's been a while. I've been intending to get to the second one. I have read some Sackett novels, but I've never read them all. So I'm going to get to the second one real soon, and I've got a companion about all of them. There you go, Sackett Companion. Now, one thing I didn't realize is that Jim is an artiste. He's an artist. So that's the word I was looking for. Artist. Anyway, he wrapped this book really nice in this thick paper, and on the top of it, he drew this fantastic illustration. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? He drew this cowboy. This is now the official cowboy for June on the Range. There you go. Fantastic. I cut it off of the wrapping paper, and I'm just going to keep it forever. I'll probably frame it and put it on my wall because it's this awesome cowboy that Jim drew, which is fantastic. I didn't know he was an artist. He has lots of talents, that guy. I don't have any talents at all. Jeez. Well, I could read books. I could do that. That's one thing I'm good at. Anyway, I will shut up now because I've been going on long enough. I will catch you next time.